unless you're living under a rock, I'm assuming you've been noticing that everything is getting super expensive lately, and I'm gonna tell you exactly why, what you need to know, how you can be prepared, because there's a huge thing coming, and if you're not prepared, you're gonna get left behind. So, number one, what is the difference between a market crash or just a market and as opposed to inflation? So market crash versus hyperinflation. This is what we're going to be talking about today. Which one are we experiencing? Because when we experience a bubble, when we experience growth in a marketplace, there are ups and there are downs. Doesn't matter if you're talking about stocks, doesn't matter if you're talking about real estate, doesn't matter what you're talking about. There are ups and then there are downs. That is the nature of markets. There are bubbles, there are troughs, and then there's just this up and down cycle, right? Now, what you need to understand about a market crash is that a market crash is extremely healthy. A lot of people get scared when there's a market crash, but in reality, a market crash is one of the best opportunities for someone to create wealth. A market crash is an incredible opportunity to even the playing field, because when a market crashes, everyone loses money. This is extremely important. This is the difference. When a market crashes, everyone loses money. The rich people lose money, poor people lose money, everyone loses money because the entire markets go down and there's an entire movement of everyone together. That's the difference. That's what happens when a market crashes. Awesome opportunity, by the way, because when a market crashes, that's when the wealthy become extra wealthy, because that's when they dive in. That's when they're buying up assets at even cheaper rates, because they know it's just a correction, meaning it will go back up eventually. So when a market crashes, that's what happens. So a lot of us are hoping for a market crash, but in all reality, what we're experiencing is inflation. Now, in the year of 2020, we printed almost $6 or even $7 trillion just because of this pandemic and what's been happening. And because of that, that is almost half of our entire nation's total supply over our entire history of this country has been printed in 1 year. What happens when you have that? You have hyperinflation. What is inflation? Inflation is when the dollar loses value. It's when there's so many dollars, when there's so much of it in circulation that it loses value. When we experience inflation, it's because we are printing and nothing is backing the dollar, nothing is anchoring it down to a certain value, because our money equals value. But if there's a lot of dollars, there's a lot of money out there being printed, then we experience inflation. Look at any other country. You go down to Mexico, you go down to South America and a lot of other countries. A lot of times when you look at the currency exchange, you could get 20 pesos equals $1. That's the same thing as inflation. But what are we experiencing here in the US? Well, what you have to understand about inflation, let me take you back to 1970. In 1970, Nixon took us off the gold standard. What does that mean? It means our dollar was no longer connected to gold. It was not backed by any form of currency. It just became this ethereal idea that whatever we say the money is what it is. That's an extremely dangerous thing, and we've experienced incredible difficulties because of that. Let me give you an example. If you were to have a six-figure income today, that's $100,000 a year or more, let's just stick with $100,000 a year, you could afford the same lifestyle as someone who made minimum wage in 1970. Meaning, if you were in 1970, you made minimum wage, you could afford the same relatively size of house, same amount of cars, same amount of vacations. You had the same relative comfort level in 1970 making minimum wage as someone who makes six figures today. That's a massive scale. That shows you what happens to inflation, because everything becomes more expensive. Now with inflation, what you have to understand is everything becomes more expensive, but what does not happen is your wages never match inflation. Let me give you an example. If you just experienced a 5% raise, say your boss comes in, he's like, congratulations, you've been working your ass off, here's 5% raise on your money. Technically, you're still losing money because we just experienced 6% inflation, and it's not stopping there because we keep printing money. We keep putting out these stimulus packages of 1.2 trillion, 3.2 trillion. We are in an extremely dangerous time in our marketplace which is why people are flocking to things like Bitcoin, because no one trusts the dollar anymore. The dollar's not backed by anything, and everything's becoming more expensive. In places in the United States, you're seeing gas prices at $7 a gallon. I predict that within the next 2 years, or even the next 3 years, before Biden leaves his presidency, you will see gas prices across the nation in most places hit $7 a gallon. What does that do for you? How would that affect your life if it cost $10 to buy a gallon of milk, if it was $7 a gallon for gas? If your day-to-day life was more expensive, but you weren't making as much money, you're making the same amount of money, then it's gonna become harder and harder to make it through. This is what happens in inflation. In a market crash, everyone loses money. In inflation and hyperinflation, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. What do I mean by that? Inflation raises the cost of living. It raises the cost of everything and everywhere in the marketplace because you need more dollars in order to afford a certain amount of things. But who does that benefit? When you are a business owner, when you own real estate, when you actually own real tangible assets, here's what happens. Inflation makes you richer. So the only way for you to be prepared for inflation and to get on top of this wave that's happening is for you to start owning real tangible assets. Let me explain. When gas hits $7 a gallon, for you making W-2 wage and making salary, that sucks because your salary is not increasing with the inflation, but everything's getting more expensive and your wages stay the same. But when you're the business owner, when you own the gas station and gas prices go to $7 a gallon, it doesn't make it that big of a difference. It doesn't hurt you as bad because you're making the according amount of profit on top of that. Same thing with real estate. Do you think I care if inflation goes up when my real estate properties go up 20% in value in 1 year? My $500,000 rental property is now worth $700,000. I just made $200,000 because of inflation. I made more money. The rent price goes up. So because I own assets, I make more money. The rich who own assets get richer. And the poor who work for dollars, who save dollars and invest everything into money, dollars, US dollars, are losing money because it's losing value. And it's becoming harder and harder to make it, harder and harder to just live. In order to get on top of what's happening, by the way, this is not the end. We are not experiencing the end of this cycle. We're experiencing the beginning. I truly believe, and a lot of other people who are a lot smarter than me believe, that the middle class in the United States is dying. If you go to any other country in the world, you don't really have a middle class. You have the rich and you have the poor. In places in Mexico, you can literally be standing on a street and on one side, it's extremely wealthy, and on the other side, it's extremely poor. People literally have huts and they're in like dirt floors. That's the kind of difference in separation. That's what made America amazing, was that we had a middle class. It was that even the middle class worker could have an incredible life and not have to scrimp and save. But that is going away. It is going away because it's getting harder and harder to be able to afford a home. Home prices are through the roof and they're not going anywhere because this is not a market bubble. This is hyperinflation that we're experiencing. And it's becoming more difficult to get a job that's going to keep up with inflation. It's going to be more difficult to afford your day-to-day lifestyle. The amount of gas, the milk, the eggs, the meat, anything, everything becomes more expensive and you don't make enough money to stay on top of it. So the only way for you to get on top of this wave is to start owning assets, to start buying things that will actually produce real, tangible equity, that will actually stay on top of the waves. You have to be owning real estate. You have to be owning businesses. You cannot be settled for just being an employee anymore. You have to actually own businesses and create products and services and generate revenue and staying on top of inflation. You have to own real estate and you have to get life insurance. Whole life insurance is one of the best things you can own in regards to staying on top of inflation. Why? Because it gives you guaranteed growth. It's going to grow your money. Your money doesn't sit in a cash savings account at 0.01% interest return. When inflation's at 6%, you need your money working for you. You can't afford to be taking losses. So you need your money somewhere that's going to grow, that you can leverage to buy more assets. So here are the three things you need. Number one, you need to buy and own businesses. Number 2, you need to buy and own real estate. Number 3, you need to buy and own life insurance. And if you don't know what I mean by that, I need you to click that link down below and I'll explain more about what this means and how you can get involved in that. And if you want to work with me and my team, we can help you buy and own businesses, buy and own real estate, and get the life insurance so that you can stay on top of the inflation so you don't have to worry about falling by the wayside as we continue to experience this as a country.